All right, for more on this, we're now being joined by Dr. John Blaxland from Washington, D.C. He's director at the Australian National University's North America Liaison Office and professor for international security and intelligence studies at Strategic and Defense Studies Center. Thank you so much for joining us on WION World is One.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Dr. Blaxland, of course, you saw what went down at the Oval Office. That was anything but diplomacy, a shouting match as it's being dubbed right now. Shocking would be an understatement. What's your assessment of how things played out at the Oval Office?
No, it was certainly shocking, but I do think it was premeditated. The fact that the Vice President was there, this is highly unusual for a state visit when you have a president speaking to another foreign president, having the Vice President accompanying you is highly unusual. And we know from previous pronouncements that the Vice President has been very disdainful of Ukraine and of the President, Volodymyr Zelensky. And it was very clear that he had quite a strong view about Zelensky's position, and President Trump turned to Vance to do some of the heavy lifting, if you like, in critiquing Zelensky. So my sense it was premeditated. Was it an ambush? It was maybe a bit strong to say that, but it was certainly a very difficult position that Zelensky was put in, and clearly with a view to getting that on the cameras, getting that to generate a global reaction, and it's certainly doing that.
You know, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, Doctor, because I was just going to come to that. It almost seemed as though this was going to happen, because we know that the security guarantees were never on the table to begin with. I believe it's fair to say that at this point. We've heard the comments in the run-up to this meeting as well. Security guarantees were never on the table. That being said, the way the Ukrainian president was shunned and perhaps cornered, if that's not too strong of a word, how do you think this will play out when it comes to actually negotiating a truce for Ukraine? Because at this point, it seems as though Trump is saying that you take what we give you, or there is no truce or security guarantees or security aid for Ukraine anymore. And we do know that Ukraine is perhaps not at a position to sustain this fight on its own.
No, that's right. So I think this was part of the conditioning, because I know President Zelensky's taken a fairly hardline position. He's been very reluctant to make concessions, particularly about the territories that have already been taken. And he's demanding from the United States what President Trump is really very reluctant to give him. So this is, I think, an attempt to soften him up. And it's interesting that Zelensky was prepared to go there. But I guess he was probably conditioned a little bit by the experience of the British Prime Minister and the French President, who were there only days before and who seemed to have good camaraderie with President Trump. It seemed to be an indicator that things were going to work out okay. Clearly, that's not what's transpired.
Absolutely, Doctor, because we've been tracking this as well, and the meetings that came before this with Macron, with Sir Keir Starmer, it seemed as though Trump was taking a softer stance when it came to Ukraine, and that perhaps he was willing to listen and give Zelensky a fair shot. That being said, now that this minerals deal has not been signed, what do you think is going to happen going forward? We've seen this affinity that Trump has towards Russian President Vladimir Putin. So what do you think is going to happen going forward on the battlefront?
So I think the deal may well still be up for deliberation, but I think we're seeing also a positioning by Donald Trump to make an arrangement so that there'll be some kind of rapprochement with Russia. I mean, the vote at the UN Security Council in support of Russia just recently, this is a breath of fresh air from Vladimir Putin's point of view. This is very much music to the Russians' ears. And this is, it appears, a plot by President Trump to, sideline the Ukraine issue so that he can build a positive relationship with Vladimir Putin. Now, if there is a grand strategy to this, it would conceivably be with a view to cleaving off Russia, from its embrace with China. because China is seen as the main game. And in terms of the Eurasian landmass, the great power dynamics across Eurasia, getting Russia to disentangle itself from China, at least to a certain extent, to weaken China's position vis-a-vis the United States as it's trying to play a very strong hand in its relationship with China. That's part of the equation. But of course, the backlash to this is that this is generating enormous resentment and fear in Europe. The Europeans are deeply unsettled about this, but it's not just the Europeans, it's the Canadians, it's people around the world, the Japanese in Australia, around the world, across Southeast Asia. I was just talking to friends in Indonesia, just thinking, what's going on? What does this mean? What does this mean for America's reliability when it can flip its allegiance from Ukraine to Russia on a dime, it seems?
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right, sir. And we also heard one of the statements that Donald Trump made, talking about how when he hears the Ukrainian president, there's a lot of hatred towards Putin. I mean, we wonder why that is. That being said, you were talking about Europeans as well, and that's what I wanted to ask you. Do you think it's perhaps time for your European Union to step up, the European partners to step up and perhaps pull in their weight? Do you think that's going to happen? Because reactions have started to pour in. Do you think they will really rally behind Ukraine?
Look, I suspect that's the case. I mean, this is unprecedented. We have never in our lifetimes experienced this kind of political turmoil. The closest thing was the falling of the Berlin Wall. What we're seeing now is another major inflection point, what the previous German Chancellor called the Zeitenwende, this major inflection point that is upending established principles, established beliefs, established loyalties and confidences and trust. And even with what we see with Macron and Starmer going to Washington, it all was fairly superficial, let's face it. It was all kind of on tenterhooks. Everybody's dancing around the presidency, worried if he's going to erupt or kind of have a reaction that is going to be hostile to France or Britain or anywhere else in Europe, because we know he's certainly been hostile towards the Ukrainians and incredibly forgiving and accepting of Russia. This is the thing. No labelling of Vladimir Putin as a dictator. No accusation of Russia for its war crimes. No reaction to the photos that Volodymyr Zelensky was trying to show him. Just the stony-faced response from the president. It's very, very telling.
Absolutely, Dr. Blackstone. You make some very pertinent points. Thank you so much for joining us on WION World is One with your insights on this. Of course, Ukraine's biggest backer saying that it's overplayed its hand and it does not have the cards to play any further. That's not going to inspire confidence at all. That being said, of course, it remains to be seen how things pan out going forward. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. For latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.